So I'm just doing a little update video on this Craftsman Utility Vehicle. If you guys haven't seen the video where I did the belt change on this, you can check it out in the top right of your screen. It should be popping up. And in that video, I replaced the incorrect half-inch belts that were on there with the proper 5/8 belts for the entire drive system. The problem I was having is when I would get onto the throttle, which is this one right here, it wouldn't return properly. So it was kind of sticking in the forward position. And that led me to believe somewhere under here, I was running into a return spring issue. So that spring that you see there with the self-tapping screw at the back there, that is in fact the return spring for the throttle. So as I move the throttle forward, the plate up there rotates, and that spring is supposed to pull this whole plate backwards. The problem was it wasn't doing that, and we can see that someone before me has taken just a self-tapping screw and put that spring kind of wherever they could, maybe to put more tension on it. But I quickly realized that the return spring itself wasn't actually the problem. So on this model, the Craftsman Utility Vehicle, there is your throttle pedal and then there's your brake pedal here. Now the way this is designed is you have a rod that goes from this side of the mower to the other side. So what you're supposed to do is just pull this pin, take your washer off, and push this rod all the way back to about here, and then you can go ahead and lift out right straight up your throttle pedal or your brake pedal. The problem is when I push the throttle pedal on the right here, you guys can see that this one moves, but when I push the brake pedal, you can see that the rod moves with the brake pedal. So the problem that I was facing was that this brake pedal is actually seized to this shaft. So I wasn't able to push the rod out, and you're gonna ask yourself, well, why would I have to? Well, there's a plastic bushing, and what's happened is these got so corroded inside of here that when I pushed the throttle forward, it was actually sticking in the forward position, and the spring on the back that I showed you guys didn't have enough tension to pull it back because this was so corroded. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm referencing the throttle and the brake lever here. You guys can see they ride on these little bushings, and what's happened is this brake lever has actually seized itself to this rod, preventing that rod from being pushed through. And because the throttle pedal kept sticking in the forward position, there was slight tension on the belt, but not enough to return it, so it was kind of smoking. And basically, here's our return spring here. We can see that off of this bracket here, it actually shows it going to the back of the machine, because here's the front of the machine, here's the back of the machine. So this return spring is supposed to go from that bracket backwards to some kind of hanger, but we couldn't locate that hanger. It appears as if someone else has taken it and gone this way with it, and that could be why it wasn't returning properly, because if the spring's going this way, it might not create as much tension as it would if it was going this way. Now, if you can go ahead and push this rod out, you can probably go and put some grease in there and then push the rod back through, and you should be fine. But I ended up going a little different route that works even better. So as you guys can see, here's our pedals, and I basically just drilled out a 3/8 hole here, and I took a bolt and a washer and I put it through. So this is your throttle pedal right here, and you guys can see my bolt goes through there, and I've put a nut up at the top and I've put a double nut at the bottom, and I've just gone ahead and put a spring to the rod that goes all the way back to that idler bracket back in there. So you guys can see it hooks up right back in there. So what I did was I unthreaded this rod, and I took the rod right out, and I drilled a hole right there at the top of the rod, and I put a long extension spring, and I've hooked that extension spring to that little bolt that I put in. So now when I push the throttle pedal forward and I release it, it springs back, and there's quite a bit of tension on it, so it pulls it all the way back this time. Now I probably could have put a tighter spring at the back. The only problem is there's not a lot of room back there, and unfortunately you have to hook the spring up to the idler bracket first and then go ahead and pull it tight so that you kind of get some tension onto the spring, and it's just not possible underneath this thing because you guys can see there's a lot going on back here and there's a lot in the way. There's tons of room up here, you know, like there's lots of room, and yeah, this ended up working perfectly. So ideally, what you want to do is push this rod out if you can, and then go ahead and grease the insides of these throttle and brake levers. But if you can't do that because that rod is seized in there, then doing what I've done with the extension spring right directly to the rod, I mean, it's perfect. That goes all the way forward, and then it snaps all the way back under tension, which puts slack onto your belt. So when you're pushing it forward, it tensions your drive belt, and when you bring it all the way back, it loosens it. And I can get a shot of that here. So we're looking at the top belt there, so you can see when I push forward, it tightens the belt, and then when I let it go, it loosens the belt, so that the engine pulley is always spinning, but you're only transferring power when you get onto the throttle. And doing it this way actually works a lot better than I thought it would have. So this is clearly the best way to do it. So this thing actually runs pretty good. There's a slight squealing coming from the back, and I think it's the jack shaft. So up under here, there's a couple pulleys, and it could be this one that's squealing. I'm not too sure. I kind of gotta get my buddy to lay down while I drive by and see if he can see where the squealing's coming from, because it's kind of hard to tell once you're up driving like this. But yeah, this throttle cable linkage fix that I did works awesome. So now you can get on the throttle, full throttle, and then you just let it go and it snaps right back and you stop driving instantly. The brakes work, I've checked them. Apart from that though, I gotta get the deck back onto this thing. I just have to find out where I'm gonna run a little return spring for the idler for the deck itself. So I'm gonna roll this thing back into the shop and have a look at that now. So I got a couple belts here. I think this one is the deck belt. I'm not sure which that one is, but it was there and they're not labeled. But right there is the idler pulley for the deck belt. That deck belt runs off of that jack shaft right there. So again, from our engine, you guys can see runs over to an idler pulley. So once you engage the bottom blades, the power is transferred from there all the way back to that jack shaft. So I have to put a return spring to this idler pulley right here. Now there's a hole right back here. I just gotta figure out where I'm gonna run the spring. It's gotta be over here somewhere. I'm not too sure where it's supposed to go, but I definitely gotta hook up a return spring for this idler pulley for the deck, or else the deck belt will be sloppy, which is no good. Now I do have a manual for this, and this was the spring that was on it. I'm not sure if that is the correct spring, so we can have a look. And I also have a belt keeper here with a couple washers and some clips. Now here's our model number. It's a 247.270.250. And I think ours is a 251. So we've written this down with our model number there and our serial number. But this thing's basically identical when I look through the whole manual. And I'll try to find a link for one of these so you guys can download it. And if I can find one, I'll put it in the description down below. This shows your machine from the underside. So here's the back drive section, here's the front where your engine is, and this is what we're looking at right now. This is your flat idler pulley for your deck, and you can see I've circled here this little black bar. That's actually the spring. That's the return spring running off of that hole. We can see that this spring number 36 goes from that to slightly back on an angle. Looks like it hooks up to this bracket right there, and it says for reference only, but I'm not sure where that hooks up. Normally they have a dotted line coming off to the hole that it goes to. I can also check. It looks like our belt number is 45, so we're going to be looking at number 36 and 45, and we can see number 36. I can run this number here, extension spring 7320814, and I can actually measure that online with the one I have right here to verify if that is in fact the right one. So if I look at number 45 here, it's a 7540495 V belt, and if we Google that number, we can see that it says it's a 5L by 53.5, and the belt that I just found here measures to be about 53.25, and this is a 5L belt. So now that I got the right belt, I have my deck sitting here. I'm just gonna go over it and check just to make sure everything's good, and then I should be ready to put the deck on. So I got the spring in, and you guys can see a little bit of permanent marker up there. So what I did before was I just notched out this little blade brake. Now this was working perfectly before. You guys can see the pulley spins nice and freely, and there's great tension on it. The only problem is if I go and push up on this belt here, the spring moves too, and that means that the spring is actually touching this belt. And we're going to run into a little smoking issue where it's going to wear off the bottom little part of that belt. So that's clearly not the spot it's supposed to go to. So I've actually gone back to a little keeper here. So you can see there's a belt keeper that comes off the frame for our back jack shaft here. And if I move my idler pulley right here, it's got wicked tension on it. And the bonus of this is that this spring now does not come anywhere near a belt, but I think this is going to work. And it seems like it's fairly tight. Maybe a little too tight. We're gonna see. Okay, so I'm just ready to put the deck on. I gotta line up these two brackets here, and then the one at the back, that one right there, actually goes up onto a stud that is on this bracket right here, so it comes off right about there. Okay, so I had this thing hooked up wrong. This is how your bracket's supposed to go. So this piece off of your deck goes onto that front piece, and you want to have your bracket located just like this. Your bar coming from there goes to the top part there. So when you're in high position, it lifts that up, and then when you're in low position, it pushes that down. So what I've done here is I've just hooked up my bar, the back bracket, and the front bracket on the right, and then I can go ahead and hook up this little bar here, so you should be able to just adjust it. So I'm going to get this back together, and then we're going to try to slip the belt on. I'm not sure if I should have put the belt on first, but like I said, this is just kind of like a mock fit. Make sure everything works. Okay, so I got all my connections pinned now, and I was able to put the belt on and then just rotate the pulley and kind of slip it on. And the only thing I'm worried about is the idler pulley position. So that's how the arm is supposed to be. We can see that the belt kind of slips off on an angle there. So I'm kind of worried that it might come off, but I did know that I had this thing cutting grass before and there were no problems. But now when I move this forward and back, we can see the deck lifts up and down nicely. And if I take a look at our positioning, the deck looks fairly level. So I don't think we have to do much adjustment. I'm going to take it out to the concrete outside and have a little closer look at it, and then maybe take this thing for a spin and see if I can cut some grass with it. Works pretty good. Well, I'm actually quite surprised with this thing. It works pretty good. A little squealing still, but I'm going to have to grease up one of those jack shafts, and that should take care of that issue. But with the deck all hooked up, cuts grass pretty good. So I just came here through my backyard. I was cutting on the low setting, which was a little low because my yard's not really that even. So it kind of bottomed out in some of the areas, and you can see where the yellow grass is. But other than that, it cuts pretty good. I did this all little strip back here, went around there. So the one thing that I noticed was on this setting here, it was a little too low, and on this setting here, it was a little too high. So what I might do is take this plate off inside of here, and I might grind a little bit away from where the hole is on this side and on this side, so that I can shift this plate slightly forward, which will lower this position to right about like there. You know, if I can get that right about there, that would be the perfect position for cutting grass. But I also have to take into consideration that the tires might not have the proper PSI in them, so I'm going to go around and check them because it has been sitting for a little while. All in all, I'm pretty happy with how this thing turned out. So that's it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed the video, think about leaving me a thumbs up. You know, it really helps me out. You can click here to subscribe and click over here to watch one of my previous videos. I upload every single week, so be sure to come on back next week. Check the channel out for new content. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.